morning. Thank you for coming out early on a Friday. I appreciate that. Got in yesterday, and this feels like home to me. I'm from not too far down the road. You get on the road, get to Kansas City, and you whip your way down the turnpike and hit Wichita. And that's where I had the privilege to serve as a member of Congress for 6 years. I spent that time doing what you all are doing here this morning. You're out here defending and championing the values that we care about. You're championing American values. And that's why I was just so thrilled to have a chance to serve President Trump for 4 years in 2 different roles. And I want to tell you all thank you for continuing to be part of this important fight. First of all, thank you to the folks who are hosting this. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's a beautiful place to be on a Friday morning. I have a few things I want to say, and then I'm going to take questions because I want to know what you all are thinking about, the things that you want to hear. I see a lot of cameras in the back. I think there's going to be some big announcement. We're in Iowa and all. First in the nation primary. That's the right thing. But my announcement today is really about you. And what I want to talk about today is you. The first time, somebody reminded me yesterday, the first time I ran for office was to become a member of my homeowners association board. I was not happy. And then I wasn't happy because I won. And debated shingle and things like that for a while. But my point is, I was a precinct committee person. I know that the work that people do all across rural parts of America and places like we are here today matters an awful lot to the very things that matter to me and to my faith and to my family. And I wanted to make sure you all know that we're going to win. In the end, there is not a doubt in my mind that our ideas are right, our values are correct, our understanding of our founding as the most remarkable thing that has happened ever to a government formation. Our founders had it right. This is a nation that is most unique and special in the history of civilization, and that if we stay at it, we will prevail. And you need to know that, and then we need to make it happen. I had these, by the way, I'm going to take Q&A. I saw a little bit of the press conference yesterday that the President Biden gave. I'm not going to turn to a single tab or anything in my notebook. If I can't answer your question from here, we've got challenges. The work that I had the privilege to do these last 4 years mattered an awful lot. I'll give you a good example that I spent a fair amount of time talking about but was ignored a little bit. I spent a lot of time with my Mexican counterpart, Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard, and the President of Mexico, Mr. Obrador, President Obrador. We worked diligently to set up a system at our southern border that worked. What do I mean by that? It worked. It protected American sovereignty. It increased the probability that we knew if there were guns or drugs or cartels or human trafficking coming across our border. It was humane. It convinced people in desperate situations sometimes in places like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, not to make the trek. And then finally, if someone had a legitimate asylum claim, we resolved it. But we did it while they weren't here. We did it while they weren't inside of our country in a way that was unlawful. And that was hard work. It was complicated work. But President Trump was committed to it. He sent me down to work on it along with a team. And we delivered a really good outcome for the United States. And you can see what happens when somebody willy-nilly, without any thought, undoes it. This is an enormous challenge, enormous crisis we face on our southern border today. I hope they will rethink it. I hope they didn't undo it just because it was the Trump Pompeo policy, and that they have a plan. This is, you see the kids that traffic and women. I think the number of those who are assaulted sexually coming up from the south to the north is on the high side of 30%. This is a tragedy, and we had stopped it. We had made a real dent in this. We had made the right decision for America. We had put America first, and we got it right. I've got to be some pretty difficult places. I did spend some time with Chairman Kim. In fact, I was reminded again the other day that I now have spent more time with the leader of North Korea than any American, including Dennis Rodman. He was the previous record holder, and I flew right past him. You know, that's a good example where President Trump gave guidance to me. I was the CIA director at the time. It was Good Friday. I flew out to go meet Chairman Kim. The President says, I want to have a conversation with him. I want to set up a time for me to meet with him somewhere, someday. Mike, you go see if you can't make that happen. We managed to establish a path where we could communicate, and I flew to Pyongyang on Good Friday morning because the goal was for me to get back and to be back at work on Monday morning so no one would know that I had traveled there. It worked. It was one of the few things in Washington didn't leak during my time. But it was truly remarkable. It was remarkable in many respects. We opened up a conversation. We convinced him to stop long-range missile testing, and there's been no nuclear testing since the President met with him in Singapore in June of that year. I also had the enormous privilege on my second, or perhaps it was third trip to North Korea to bring back 3 Americans that were being held there. And then we had the remains of our fallen soldiers who had been killed in Korea during the war. And we had the remains of many of those soldiers returned to the United States of America. It was one of the great achievements of the things that I was able to do, along with a 15. I cite that example because it's the way we thought about the world. It's the way that President Trump thought about the world. We know what's real. We're not going to fake this. We're not going to pretend that things are as we wish they were, but we're going to deal with it just like you do. Just like you do every day. You get up in the morning and reality hits you and you go out and do your best to crush it. That was my job. And we did that. We did that throughout the world. We did that in the defense of the rightful Jewish homeland, Israel. The history was that if you didn't stall the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, that you couldn't create peace there. That was the storyline, right? It was false, and we knew it. And we knew that, the President could have sent me on shuttle diplomacy between the West Bank and Jerusalem for months on end. We wouldn't have solved a thing. Just like my predecessor, and my predecessor's predecessor, my predecessor's predecessor did, we wouldn't have solved a thing. So we took a fundamentally different approach. We wanted life to be better for everyone, including the Palestinians, but we weren't going to let the terrorist regime that's running the West Bank today, the Palestinian Authority, get in the way of increasing peace in the region. And so 3 things we did. First, we said, well, this is nonsense to buddy up to Iran. No pallets of cash, no resources, no silly deal that doesn't protect the United States from the most fundamental threat to terror, the most anti-Semitic nation on the face of the earth. So we put enormous pressure on the regime in Iran. Second, the Israelis said their capital was in Jerusalem. Who are we to argue? Right? And so we moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem to recognize the rightful capital of the State of Israel. We laid out the vision for peace. And the vision for peace, along with a lot of really hard work from a whole bunch of us, Mr. Kushner, myself, Secretary of Treasury, a whole bunch of us, laid down the vision for peace, and it ultimately led to the Abraham Accords. And for those of us who are at least a little bit steeped in the Bible, we know what that means, and we know what the hope that the Abraham Accords can bring to the world, not just to the region. We've got countries that forever had denied Israel's right to exist, and we got them to agree, no, it's better to be their friend, their ally, their partner, their diplomatic counterpart, their security team member. And so we've had 3 countries formally sign, 2 come a long ways, and a whole bunch more that I am confident that will reshape this important place. As an evangelical Christian, the importance of Israel cannot be overstated. This important place in the world for generations to come. It was remarkable. I was glad to be just a small part of it. And then I'll close, and I'll take questions. I would get asked, what keeps you up at night? What's the greatest threat to the United States of America? And I always would answer that. Even when I was Secretary of State, I would say the greatest threats, of course, are that we get it wrong here at home. There's no doubt about that. The biggest risk to our republic is from a failure of our institutions to effectively deliver good outcomes for the American people, a failure of our democracy, to get our schools wrong in the way they are. Some of the things that we're teaching in our schools today are crazy on steroids. But if we get it wrong here at home, that undoubtedly presents the greatest risk to my son. He's engaged now, hopefully grandkids not too far off. But when you step away from that, the question was about the challenges around the world, and you should know that the Chinese Communist Party wants to undermine exactly what it is we're doing here today. And too many, frankly, in the Democrat Party don't understand that in a way that will deliver the things that we need to do for the United States of America. I'm reminded of the meeting that was held this past couple weeks in Anchorage, where my successor's counterpart talked about BLM. Think about that. You had the foreign minister, Yang Wei and Wang Zhisher, talking about Black Lives Matter here in the United States. We all know that we care about equality. I went to an institution, I went to a college for West Point solely for the purpose, because I believed it was this place where if I just worked hard and did the right thing, I'd have a real chance. There was equality of opportunity there. We believe in that. We had a United States Senator the other day said she would not vote for a nominee. She would not vote for a nominee if they were white and straight. And that's not who we are as Americans. Those aren't the values that we should be championing. And the Chinese Communist Party grabs that. And you can see what they're doing. They're doing it in Confucius Institutes all across America. I don't know if you have them here in your great universities. My wife reminded me, my wife was born in Iowa City. Spent her summers in Iowa City and Coralville and I can't remember, she told me a couple of the other places. Strawberry Point, yes. She would be very angry that I didn't remember Strawberry Point. But places like this are the places that really deliver on behalf of the United States of America. And the Chinese Communist Party wants to undermine the way we think about the world. They'll use every tool that they have. We saw they were conducting espionage, and I closed their consulate in Houston, where they were spying. They were spying on universities and energy companies in America. I say I did it with the president's full authority. There would have been no president that would have allowed that to happen. There were a lot of naysayers, even inside the U.S. government, says if we do this, the Chinese will respond in a way that will be very costly for us. And just said, nuts, let's go. And let's do it. It's the right thing for the United States. This will be the challenge of our times, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But know this, the Chinese Communist Party has designs on global hegemony, and they want to take apart our republic, and we can't let it happen. Republicans and Democrats alike for 40-some years allowed engagements, and if we just buy some more stuff from them or sell some more things to them, then they'll stop bothering us. That's fundamentally not true. It won't work, it didn't work, and we can't allow them to continue to undermine what it is that we cherish and value so much. So with that, I'm happy to talk about almost anything. It's the whole CIA thing that gives you the almost part. Yes, sir, in the back here.
Yes, a few years ago, there was a book called The 100-Year Marathon on China, Mike Pillsbury.
Mike Pillsbury, yes.
Do you think most of the things that he wrote in that, some of it I can see coming true? Do you think he was pretty right on his book?
It's a really good book. He was pretty right on, and I think if you asked Mr. Pillsbury now, who's the author of this book called The 100-Year Marathon, I think he'd say it's a 50-year marathon today. That your point's well taken. Some of this has actually come into being, and it's happened more quickly than even he had written about. The scale, you can't imagine, right? It's 1.4 billion people. I was a soldier during the Cold War. I patrolled the East German border in my M1 tank. It was glorious times. The scale and the economic connectedness between the United States and China, and frankly China and the rest of the world, presents a fundamentally different challenge, a more complicated challenge than we had in defeating the Soviet Union. But I do hearken back to the theory. President Reagan said two things. He said trust but verify. My theory is with China, distrust and then verify. They have proven worthy of that admonition. And second, President Reagan has said we win, they lose. And that's what it's going to have to be with respect to the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to win, and they will ultimately lose. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Fair warning. Okay. This past election, sir, as we watched what transpired, I personally felt like I was watching Dallas, Texas, 1963 all over again. Only this time, instead of bullets, ballots were used. So my question to you is, what counsel did you give to the president? I know there were a couple of times that you gave speeches, press conferences after the election, and you said a couple of times, I'm confident that Donald Trump will be president of the United States when this is all said and done. That didn't happen. So what counsel did you give to the president, and do you think that he stood on the oath that he took to uphold the Constitution of the United States by leaving and not fighting it.
That's a fine question, thank you. I'm gonna try and do this without the microphone so I don't get that feedback. Everybody hear me way in the back, sir? Can you hear me all right? No, all right, we'll take the feedback. All right. Too far back. Look, I wasn't in the center of this. I was a Secretary of State, so I wasn't in the middle of this. And I don't talk about the things I told or didn't tell the president. It's just a rule. And sadly, some of my colleagues didn't abide by that rule. But I did believe firmly that the president had a responsibility and an obligation that he lived up to fight this as far as he could and as hard as he could in every single material way. And he did that. He did his best to litigate. They did their best to push back. So I absolutely think that. I saw the president, goodness, maybe 3 weeks ago now, and we were talking about how we move forward, how we make sure that elections are fair and free. And you see, by the way, the law passed in Georgia, I think it passed yesterday, is a good one. Watch what the Democrats are doing. This is a raw power grab. You all are living part of it here. You all are living the part where they're going to go try and steal a seat from an Iowa congresswoman. Don't let it happen. Don't let it happen. This is outrageous. This is a certified election. Well, I think there's a lot of tools that your members of Congress can use. You have two fantastic senators. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. This is a raw power grab, and we can't let it happen. Second, we all know what common sense rules look like. We have to look for voters. Don't let them call you racist and walk away when you do that. It's not racist to say, hey, someone ought to have to show an ID to vote. It's not racist to think, hey, only people who legitimately are on the voter roll should be able to vote. It's not racist to say we got to be really careful about mailing out ballots to voter rolls that we all know. I lived with this when I was a member of Congress in Kansas. I know those voter rolls. God bless our electoral offices, but it is hard to keep track when people move, people pass. You have to do this in a sophisticated way, and we haven't been all across America. We have to get this right. And it starts in your state legislatures, and it starts with who you elect for state judges. All of these things matter enormously. They matter in 2022. In fact, this is why I'm here today, right? My wife and I decided what could we do to keep working on the issues that matter to us most. After having this privilege to serve for 4 years, we decided we were going to make sure that the total control of Washington, D.C. was as short-lived as humanly possible. I was in Texas early in the week. I was helping Congressman Don Bacon in Omaha last night. I'm going to be with your Congresswoman Ashley Hinson this afternoon. We have to hold every seat we have. We got to go win. I'd love to win a couple dozen more. I actually know how to do that. I came into Congress the last time we retook Nancy's gavel in 2010. The 87 Republicans were elected because of the outrageous activity that President Obama was engaged in. I promise you, you're going to see that again. That is the outrageous activity part. We have to make sure that we see again the success in taking back the House of Representatives. It will limit the damage that President Biden can do to our country.
We're honored to have you.
All right, yes, sir. I'll come right
to As far as President Biden is concerned, do you think he's a Trojan horse for the far left?
I vaguely remember the story of the Trojan horse from my days in history class, but I know the parable for sure. Look, I always said this in the work that I was doing too. It's much less about what someone says and what they do. Let's keep our eye on the ball. Let's watch what they do. Let's not pay attention to what some backbench member of Congress from New York says. Let's not focus on a press conference or something that's silly. The actions they're going to take are going to be fundamentally at odds with the values that we champion here in the United States. And that's what we've got to stay focused on. I'll leave whatever they're doing inside of that party to themselves. We have a responsibility to go deliver. We have a responsibility to work every day to elect good candidates to every level, school board, city council, all the things that matter a lot in America. If we get that right, Trojan horse or not, we'll be all right. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I know it's really complicated, but big China, big ag, and big chemical, they're almost there. What's your thoughts on that? If they get that, it's over.
Yeah, so.
And maybe I'm wrong. even bring it up, but
Well, it
they
is.
own one already, one.
So it is the case that the Chinese Communist Party has run a sophisticated effort to steal our technology, including our agricultural technology.
Yeah, by pioneers.
Absolutely true, whether it's to your point on seeds, Pioneer Seeds. I saw
They
this.
had so many acquisitions there. It's
I saw this,
unreal.
by the way, they're purchasing land. In Kansas, they own things that, a piece of real estate that had cell towers on them.
Yep.
This is the kind of thing that we had just turned our heads away from this because there was a chance to make money selling to 1.4 billion people, and in some cases to take American jobs and transfer them and have labor that was less expensive than we would have in Wichita, Kansas, or in Des Moines, Iowa. Right? It's just, we should just all acknowledge this. We should say, fair enough, we slept on this. After the Cold War, we all just slept on this. No more. And we began to turn this tide. I'll give you a really good example. So we began to turn the tide back at home. The president did the work he did to try and get fair and reciprocal trade with China. I know it was controversial, but it was necessary to get this right, to make sure that the fair trade with China that we did was fair. The second thing we did is we said if it's got to do with national security, and I would put our agriculture industry at the center of that, the food supply, all of the things that you all know here in Iowa is part of our national security challenge. We started to get that right as well. We made a reasonable amount of progress there. We then know we need friends and allies around the world to work on this too and think about China the same way we do. I gave a speech in Brussels, Belgium. This is kind of an international, very nicely dressed people. Yes, I went among them. But in any event, I gave a speech. I talked about the threat that China posed to them and to the people that they were tasked with representing. And I think I've been the Secretary of State for a couple, 3 weeks. I can't remember. It's at the beginning of my time. Total silence. I didn't get a golf clap walking out. So I was really glad to hear you all applaud when I came in today. I knew I wasn't in Brussels. 2 years later, I went back. I gave a speech. There's something called the Munich Security Conference. I gave a speech in Munich on virtually the same topic. The topic was the West is winning. I know we're going to prevail. I know it. I look in your eyes. I can see it in your faces. I know the next generation. I know sometimes people say, oh, they don't get it. I know these kids. We're going to be fine. I gave that speech, and I got enormous support. The world had awakened to the challenge of the Chinese Communist Party. And so to your point, I don't believe we're too far down the path. It's not irreversible. We just have to confront it head on, and with the seriousness and with the joy that comes with knowing that our republic matters and we're prepared to defend and fight for it. Yes, sir, you're in the back.
In the last year, I've read 3 books by Peter Zeihan and a geopolitical strategy guide. He seems to think that China is going to break up in the near future into multiple countries, but they have bigger problems than we have from a racial standpoint. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I hope he's right. I'm kidding. What's great about not being the Secretary of State anymore is I can say things that when I was a diplomat I couldn't say. I can make jokes that I wouldn't have made. Look, remember the history, and it's a long history. It is a centuries-long history. The Han-Chinese history is that this is a region that was kind of sewn together. Tibet, Mongolia, western part of the country now, Xinjiang, where we have the most outrageous human rights violations since the 1930s in the world. What they're doing to these people, these Uyghurs, they're mostly Muslim, but there are other faiths as well. Forced sterilizations, forced abortions. It is awful, and I declared that it was genocide because it is. These are the kind of things that I think will cause the Chinese Communist Party real challenges. They have a demographic challenge, they have a debt challenge, they are expanding very quickly. They still have a huge population that is living in absolute poverty that they're trying to move to the urban areas. So we don't for a moment believe, I don't for a moment believe that they are 10 feet tall in every dimension. They have enormous challenges. The problem is that if we appease, if we are weak, then those challenges won't be impacted. They'll be able to glide through them and have the space and capacity to continue to foist their Marxist-Leninist ideology on all of us. And so I do think that we will see change there. I never predict the when part of any of these things, but I'm confident that if we get it right here, that the Chinese Communist Party will be deeply challenged. They represent there's about 180 or 190 million Chinese. That sounds like a lot, but it's just over 10% of their population that are actually members of the Chinese Communist Party. There's a whole lot of folks there that know that they can't see the internet, that they can't see the movies they want, that they can't practice their faith in the way that they want to practice their faith. There are a lot of people that know this, not just in Hong Kong and Taiwan and Tibet, but all throughout China, and there will be a day. Yes, yes, ma'am, in the next wall.
Thank you. Thank you. I had the privilege and the opportunity to live in Jerusalem for 16 years. Oh, sorry. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
And I know firsthand from on the ground what a difference what the Trump administration and what you, sir, did that made such a huge difference. You took a problem that nobody could solve, and you solved it in a way that created the opportunity for peace in the region that nobody thought was possible. What I'd like to ask you is where you think this will go next.
I thank you, and thanks for the kind words. No one would have believed it. Even when we unveiled our peace plan, I remember the New York Times saying I was the worst Secretary of State in the history of America. I immediately began to scan the roster and identified at least two that I thought better than that. I believe with all my heart that the process that we have now commenced, and I say we in big we here, the United States, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, the Moroccans, the Sudanese, the Bahrainis, everyone who is working, even the Saudis and the Omanis, countries that have not yet signed the Abraham Accords, are headed in one direction, towards a central understanding of Iran as the largest threat in the region, and to isolate and weaken them. And second, that a foreign policy based on hatred of the Jewish people and a desire to wipe Israel from the face of the earth is not rational. It's not good for their people. It's not the morally right thing to do. And I am convinced that the relationships that were built and the policies that have now put in place and the work that so many of us were engaged in will reshape the landscape in the Middle East for the next generation. I'm really proud of that work. It wouldn't have happened without President Trump giving us all the green light to go work on this problem in what was admittedly a counter-establishment way. It wouldn't have happened, and I'm convinced that we set the march for what will be really good things and reduce risk and reduce threats and reduced need for our young men and women to go be in those places and sacrifice their lives to go serve and fight in those places. I think we will take down the risk that we need to do that in the future, and that's something that's really good. Yes, yes, sir.
Thank you, Secretary. You know, Ronald Reagan pointed out that Russia was the evil empire of his presidency, and we addressed that with NATO. What would the viability of putting together a coalition of nations militarily and on trade do to restrain, what you had talked about, the Chinese being hell-bent on world domination?
So it's the exact right approach. It'll have a little different wrinkle. Yeah, the Chinese refer to their system as socialism with Chinese characteristics. Think about that for a minute. We're moving towards socialism with Kamala Harris's characteristics. We will have to build out exactly the coalitions that you described, and we started that. There's something called the Quad. It's 4 powerful economies, 4 powerful militaries: the Australians, the Americans, the Japanese, and the Indians. And it had been around a little bit, but we elevated it. The good news was actually the administration held a meeting with all the leaders of the Quad. This kind of coalition building will matter. And I say that, we were accused of, I'm very proud that we had America first. It was the right approach. I was unabashed. I'd walk anywhere in the world and tell them, I care about America first. If I was with Chancellor Merkel, I'd say, I hope you have Germany first, right? You are the leader. You're the dual elected leader of your country, and you ought to do right by the people that you have been charged with preserving, protecting, and defending. But it doesn't mean there aren't friends and partners. What the mistake that had been made, and I'm afraid we're about to make again, is we put having these relationships above defending America. So when you put climate change at the top of your foreign policy agenda, You can't have America first at the top of your foreign policy agenda, right? It's about a globalist idea that says we're going to go sign the Paris Accords, which was the single biggest gift to the Chinese Communist Party you can imagine. Anybody think the Chinese are going to live up to their commitments? I mean, it's just implausible. And so we do need to build these out. And there will be, and it was the work I talked about from Brussels to Munich, moving the world to a common set of understandings. I'll give you one tactical victory that we achieved, more than tactical, almost strategic. A company called Huawei, big, powerful Chinese telecommunications company. Huawei equipment in the state of Kansas, it's everywhere, or was. We said we're not going to allow that to happen. It is controlled by the Chinese military and their security apparatus. So my counterpart, when I was CIA director, was the MSS, had access to all the data that flows across Huawei technology. They could get their hands on it if they needed it. And yet the West had said, hey, this is cheap, this is free, we're going to put it in our systems. And we launched a campaign around the world to convince countries all across the world. By the time we left, we had 60 plus countries and 120 telephone companies. Often those are the decision makers, right? So Deutsche Telekom, L'Orange in France, AT&T and Verizon. We had 120 plus telecom companies around the world that said we're not going to use Chinese technology. That's the way you work to build out strength and power and use America's economic influence to deliver security for each and every one of us. That's the direction of travel. I do hope on this place and in this very special concern that this administration gets it right. There's a chance. There are Democrats. It is the counter-China effort. There are serious Democrats who can see it too. I hope that they will be bold and strong and willing to fight in the same way that we were. Yes. Yes. And wait.
So my question for you is, in 2020, 60% of dollars that are in circulation were printed in 2020 alone. Given the massive amount of spending that the Biden administration has proposed, how long do you think we have until the U.S. dollar just completely collapses in value?
Oh, I couldn't tell you the day, but the direction. The question's important, and the direction of travel is bad. Look, the dollar's pretty strong for a host of reasons. I think we've got runway. But if you see, right, another good example, right? When you see the Chinese reducing their purchases of U.S. securities, right? They were a big customer for the debt that we issue to back the printing of paper that we do. You know, they think there's an opportunity there. You know, they think yesterday or the day before, they tried to take a online currency and attempt to get their counterpart to the Federal Reserve, the People's Bank of China, to certify this so they could conduct transactions around the world, global transactions outside of a U.S. dollar denominated currency. This is a real challenge. We have to be serious about getting our fiscal house in order. That means a lot to a lot of us. There's a lot of us that are beneficiaries of this from time to time. Know this, it's a little bit about green eye shade accounting, the debt to GDP. You can get lost in the numbers. I think about it differently. Every time money goes to Washington, we lose just a little more of our liberty. Just a little bit more of our capacity to govern our own lives in the way we want to. Counties that I know and love, in Kingman County, in Sumner County, in Kansas, places like this, we lose just a little bit more. There's just a nick on our freedom. And so those of us of a conservative mindset, need to be serious about this and thoughtful, and we need to learn to say no as well, and make sure that we get that part of our American power in line with reality. Thanks. I can tell you where my Social Security check's probably going to clear. I tell my son, make sure you take care of yourself. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here today. I'm just wondering, the ship that's blocking the Suez Canal,
Yeah.
how did that happen? Was it intentional? And how is that going to affect our global trade?
So I only know what I have read. I don't get to read all the good stuff anymore every morning. So I only know what I have seen publicly. My sense is it was pilot error, harbor pilot error, but truth is, I don't know. They'll eventually get it straightened out. It's going to create a bit of a mess. I imagine that mess isn't long lasting. They'll get it cleared, and the shipping lanes will ultimately be reopened. But it does remind me of something that we worked really hard on. We talked about Israel and the Middle East. Right, the risk that the shipping lanes, whether it's the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz was closed, was real and is real, and it impacts us. Good news is it impacts China a lot more than us. And I'll say this, we were very mindful that China depends on the world for nearly all of its energy. LNG, petroleum products, refined petroleum products as well being shipped into China. The United States, in our administration, became a net exporter of energy. And when I traveled the world, it was very seldom the case that I met with a world leader who didn't want to talk about energy. It wasn't always the first issue on their list. It wasn't always second, but it was seldom far behind that. If we begin to do what the Obama administration did again, to put environmental regulations on, it'll impact not only the agriculture community that's so important to the economy here in Iowa, but our power around the world, our capacity to deliver energy to countries that desperately need it and who want it to come from a country like ours and not from someplace else. We've got to get it right. We have to keep the sea lanes open and secure, and then we've got to produce American energy for America, and then American energy to use to exert our capacity to have influence around the world as well. I fear whether it was the Keystone Pipeline that they shut down or what we saw come out of the Obama EPA, and the fact that one of my predecessors, Secretary Kerry, is now the head of climate policy. These do not bode well for American energy and for affordable energy here at home either. Yes, sir.
My wife and I, the proud parents of the United States Army captain, we want to thank you.
It's awesome. That's all I ever meant to, Captain. If he makes major, he's got me.
We hope that's in the cards for this year yet, but I think everyone in the room is frustrated with the idea that we see our country now being governed by executive orders. I'd like you to comment on that.
So I've had 3 places to watch this phenomenon from. First, 4. First as a private citizen who was pretty hacked off. Second as a member of Congress and in 2 roles in the administration, and I watched it. It's not healthy. And by the way, it's not healthy when Republicans do it. It's just, right, our founders envisioned a model for a republic that we all know, right? We know Article 1, 2, and 3, we can all walk through it. It's not good. There's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of transparency. It frankly allows presidents to create far more capacity to do things than our founders had intended. Yes, in the near back, yes.
I'm pretty disgusted by the fact that no one in Washington is ever held accountable for their illegal activities. Do you have any idea what's happening with the Durham investigation?
You remember the part about I'll talk about almost anything? I will make an exception. I will say this. I don't want to address the Durham investigation in particular, but I do want to say this. I've seen precisely what you're talking about. My conclusion after having seen this up close and personal is the mode for accountability best able to deliver that accountability is in this room. That if we count on others to do this, if we count on the Department of Justice, or heck, I've been investigated by the State Department IG, I think I still am. Not a friendly system. Accountability has to be you all. We need people who are engaged. You all came out on Friday morning. I need you all engaged, holding people accountable when they don't do what they said they do. And I mean this for people of our party too. This is not meant to be a partisan shot at all. If we don't do what we promise to do, or at least make everything, use every tool that we have and every God-given talent that we have to do it, then you all deserve to hold us accountable. And there are lots of ways to do that. Send letters, do all kinds of things, and then you can ultimately say, no, we're going to make a change. We're not going to vote for them. We're not going to support them. We're going to deliver the people to Washington that will actually do what they said they were going to do. One of the things I am most proud of that President Trump did is that he directed each of us to say, go back, look at the things that I committed to do when I ran for office and go deliver them. Work your tail off to get it done. I'm looking, I see Matt back there. I think he'd second that, right? He had the same.
I'm just glad I didn't get that question.
I almost kicked it to you. I was this close.
Mr. Secretary?
Yes.
You mentioned
Oh, yes, sir.
Huawei and telecom. But I heard that the new administration had decided to put.
Aren't they in
The
electronics?
technology into the grid, Chinese technology into the grid. And
So I had not seen that. I hadn't seen them make that decision yet. I know that they are reviewing the things that we did with respect to Huawei. We put a whole bunch of their technology on what's called it's a technical term, but we essentially banned it from the United States, put it on the Commerce Department export list. Essentially says you can't ship it here. I haven't seen them undo that yet. I know they were reviewing it. It would be an enormous mistake to undo that.
You see what the dimwit corporations are doing to the Pillow Man, who is a stand-up guy, so you know what's ahead for all of us.
Yes. I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering how we take back anything or send anybody to Washington with the rampant voter fraud that goes unchecked, and it just emboldens people. I mean, you know the scriptures, they even talk about that if people aren't brought to justice, they're emboldened, they do more. So how do we take things back?
I thought I talked about this some. You gotta get it right, and you all know we know how to do this. In Kansas, we figured this out, right? We had poll watchers, and we put a set of rules in place that made sense, common sense voting rules. We didn't go do these things that were justified under the guise of COVID, right? That we're going to mail ballots to everyone. These things that just introduce enormous risk to election integrity. And your point is very well taken. If somebody sees they can drive a truck through a hole, the whole fleet comes following through. Look, I'm convinced. I've seen great Republican governors and attorney generals across the country beginning to right the ship with respect to their rules at the states. And you can tell that they are effective. You can tell that the Democrats are concerned that we're going to be good at this, that we're going to effectively fix this problem, because H.R. 1 is designed to drive a dagger in the heart of what we're doing at the state level. And so I'm confident Senators Grassley and Ernst are going to do everything they can to make sure that H.R. 1 doesn't destroy the fundamental right of states to figure out how they want to hold elections for themselves. And if we allow states to do that, we'll get it back. We'll get it right. I'm very confident that we will. We know how to hold good elections, right? Things like paper ballots and all the things that we know how to do to make sure we want everyone to get a chance to vote who's legally able to vote. That's a good thing in America. What we don't want is bad ballots, and bad ballots counted. Whoever you'd like to, yes.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for a lifetime of service to this nation. West Point has delivered 2 graduates to be President of the United States, as you know.
Oh, here we go.
You didn't expect to get it? All right, we've got Ulysses Grant. We've got Dwight Eisenhower.
Yes,
Is it time for a 3rd West Point graduate to become president?
Mr. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower was a great Kansan. There's my answer. I do want to make a comment about that, though. It's March of 2021. We can see what the Biden team is up to. We can see the agenda. We know they, frankly, mostly campaigned on it. There is an important checkpoint between now and 2024. These elections in 2022 will have a real impact on how 2024 ultimately goes as well. And it's why I'm out here today. It's why I'm going to continue to go out and campaign. I'm headed down to Alabama, which I think will provide cover for coming to Iowa, right? We have to win everywhere, and we have to win in 40 or 45 districts that are really close and competitive. There's one of them here in Iowa as well. Ms. Axney holds the seat. We need it back. Republicans to win that seat. And so if we get that right, if we get 2022 right, then 2024 will solve itself. Yes, sir.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. Morning.
We hear a lot these days about the need to get to cooperate and be more unified and be more charitable to each other. Based on your great experience that you've had more recently and before that, what will be your plan to get that started? How do we start getting both sides to be more considerate? It can't be just one side.
Yeah. So I try. I did not often succeed. My wife describes me as authentic Christian. That is, we try every day and we don't always live out his word perfectly. And with respect to treating everyone right, which I think is at the core of your question, right? Treating even the folks that have political disagreements with us appropriately. We don't always get that right either. We need to do this by example ourselves. And if it's not reciprocated, if they don't return that, so be it. I would say this, that doesn't require you ever to stop defending the principles and values that you believe in, and doing it with all the energy and all the vigor that you can muster. The fact that I try every day to get up and be a warrior with joy in my heart doesn't mean that I don't have a dagger in my mouth. We have to win. These ideas matter. Our founders nailed it. When I hear them talk about the 1619 Project and that somehow our founding was so fundamentally flawed that we can't be a great nation, and that somehow other countries, which is very more relativistic, I'm not so sure America really has this rightful special place among nations. We're right, they're wrong about that. And we should just be clear, we should smile when we say that. And we should reach out a hand and make the case and make the arguments to them about why we're right. The last piece of this is there is a generation that's coming behind all of us. And we need to win this argument with them as well. And they need to see that this is a joyous enterprise, that this is an enterprise that understands that family and faith ought to be at the center of everything that we do here in America. And if we do that, if we make this case, if we make this argument, if we build this coalition, then there will be more come alongside of us, and some of the bitter, contentious things that you see today that I have experienced, I hope they'll be diminished. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your presence today and for your service. I'd like to ask you if there's any way that we can get any control back of the media. And I don't mean control, I mean just a balance of fairness. The media is our #1 enemy. They're the ones that are painting the colors. They're the ones that are influencing the young people. They're the ones that are going to be the ones that spread the socialism that we are experiencing by the Democratic Party. Is there anything that conservatives can do to win back a fair representation?
Yes. Let me start with the top line point. Your point about the hypocrisy and imbalance in the national media is absolutely true. And if you come down even a level below that, the McClatchy papers in Kansas, this is a leftist train wreck, right? Literally, to get our voices out through these mediums proves incredibly difficult. So there's the predicate, there's the challenge that we face that you confront. I have 2 rules. One is acknowledge that it exists, but never use it as an excuse for losing, right? So figure out a solution if you're competing for the space of ideas, competing in an election, whatever it may be, no excuses. I didn't let my son have them when he was 8. We shouldn't have them when I am now almost 58. We have to acknowledge the landscape and say, we're gonna figure out how to compete in the environment in which we're in. The second piece is then you go to try and change the environment. You go try and deliver in a way that gives us the capacity to reach out to different voices. You're starting to see the proliferation of some conservative media outlets, not just on TV. We often think about this just on TV, but you're starting to see it online. You're seeing some really creative work that's going on different websites and the like that have real reach and real capacity. Young people doing some amazing reporting that has a viewpoint that I don't think of as conservative, but as fact-based. This is really important. We should support them. We should read the things that they do. If it's $2 to sign up for the newsletter, we should pay the $2. We should support those folks who are committed to fairness, transparency, and an equal presentation of the facts. Your point's exactly right. This isn't about This isn't about trying to make sure that the media is all with a viewpoint that is ours. It's about a media that is a viewpoint of reflecting the reality that we all live every day. And I must say, I was in meetings and I would pick up the Washington Post and say, I'm not sure what hallucinogen I must have been on. because this did not happen. And it's reported as fact, it then gets picked up on CNN and MSNBC, and then it frankly, to your point, gets picked up all around the world as fact. And I was there, it just wasn't true. This is not healthy for our republic. And so I have some ideas, they're a little complicated, I won't go into this morning on how we can begin to work on that, but know this, there are a lot of people working on this. We will all need to support them when they take risks. They make financial risks connected to trying building out fact-based communication systems, both in print and online and on our airwaves. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service, Secretary. My question is, what are your thoughts about all of the censorship that's going on right now, whether it's Twitter or Facebook and all that kind of stuff? I mean, I'm not sure person question for you, but we can't put anything, we get censored anything that we should be it's censored and blocked. What's your thoughts on that happening?
So the question was about censorship broadly and how might we all think about combating it, whether it's, you were talking about on a Twitter feed or a Twitter account or Facebook page. I don't have the answer to this one yet, but I know it's real. I've experienced it. Sounds like many of you have as well. I want to raise up one level because the electronic and the social media censorship we can see and we can feel we can begin to address. The broader risk from censorship is happening in small rooms like this. It's happening in the lunchrooms at work. It's happening in some of our churches, and it's certainly happening on our campuses all across America. These are the places that ideas are formed, that minds are shaped, that exchange of ideas is the thing that we've always, right? I've always been a believer in more ideas, good. We'll battle it out and we'll get to the best one, right? This thesis, this theory is under assault. It is absolutely under assault. They want to take our voices down. They want to move them to the back corner. They want to make sure that they are not capable of being propagated because they're afraid of the power of ideas. I believe this fundamentally comes from their knowledge that they are weak, that their ideas are weak, and that they are not right. And they know that they're confronted by the things that we care about, the faith that we have, that they will not prevail. So we've got to make sure that we're strong. I always say, answer wokeism with a smile and a direct response. And it's not easy to do. My son, I try not to use him as an example too often, but suffice it to say, what's happening in workplaces across America, the voices that are being shut down in workplaces across America is deeply troubling, and it's coming from the workforce and then from big company leadership all across America. I don't want just my ideas. I don't want just our ideas. Everyone to be able to speak their mind in a way that is respectful and decent and tries to make an argument about the right way for America to move forward. And we've got to figure out a way to confront it, but it starts with each of us. It starts with each of you. You're at a PTA meeting, or you're at a soccer game, kids, or you're just out at the coffee shop, and you hear it. Not to be mean, don't have to be angry. Indeed, you should be neither of those. Make sure you don't let it go unanswered. Make sure you say, hey, there's another way to think about this, and present our theory of the case.
We're just glad you're not saying I'll circle back.
In the theory of comedy and friendship and kindness, I'm going to let that go. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your service to our country. I am a retired Lutheran Church Missouri Synod pastor, and I'd like your comments on the so-called Equality Act, because if it is adopted, our church's doctrine will be ruled illegal.
Yes, I'm a member of Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Wichita, Kansas. Been watching it online too much lately. We face the same risk at our church as well. This challenge from the Equality Act is real and is representative of what we were just talking about. They're very much part and parcel of the same concept. This First Amendment thing I think that's what the Democrats call it, this First Amendment thing. It's not a thing. It is the capacity to assemble, as we are here this morning, the capacity to speak our minds, as I've done today, and the ability of us to practice our faith freely are at the center of who we are. And the Equality Act is nothing of the kind. In fact, let's just cut to the chase. In the end, the progressive movement seeks equality of outcomes, right? They want to demand and force a set of outcomes that are equal in their eyes. Our vision of equality is very different. Our vision of equality is let's get after it together, right? When I was an employer, when I ran 2 small companies in South Central Kansas, machine shops, machine parts and lathes and the like. I can actually run a lathe. You probably wouldn't want to drive in a vehicle with a part I made, but nonetheless, I can start it and I could make a simple part. At least I could 20 years ago. They don't understand the people that came to work there. And they don't understand how I thought about my business. I was every day looking for the most talented person to be my lead engineer. I was looking for the most talented human being to come figure out how to run my shipping operations, right? I didn't give a darn where they came from. I didn't give a darn, frankly, where they went to school or their race or their gender. I was trying to build a team, a high-performing team of excellence. And this is what we try to do all across America. We want to reward people who work hard, tell the truth, and keep their faith. And the Equality Act is fundamentally in opposition to that. So, again, these are going to be 13, 15, 18 months where these central underpinnings of our republic are challenged by the left. Stay at it. Stay engaged. We have to win. And 2022 as a waypoint to that is an important moment. Who else? Anybody? Yes, ma'am. So far, by the way, no notes, no tabs. Yeah. Sure. A couple more. Yes.
I'm a son of the Navy, and I've watched his purview of the world mature as he matures. That would be considered a right-wing person. But I am very concerned about what appears to be the social engineering of our military. Could you speak to that?
Yes, I can. I'm very worried about it too. I even care about it in the Navy. Good Army guy. Look, with all seriousness, we've seen, by the way, what happened 2 weeks ago now, where you had uniformed military members confronting a public media persona for expressing his ideas. That's outrageous. There's a uniform code of military justice. I have not read it lately, but I am confident that it was inconsistent with that. I am worried. The military has always been this beacon that was transformative for our young people and transformative for our society. And I am perfectly happy to have a diverse military as well, right? It's great. I had soldiers that were had immigrated to the United States. I had African American soldiers that were in my tank platoon. Just like, give me a tank gunner that can hit the target. This is going to matter someday, right? And yet, what the mindset that they appear to be driving down that, right? One of the first things they do is they held a stand down to root out extremism. A handful of potentially bad actors, fine. If there's bad actors doing bad things and they're violating the rules, so be it. Your son would want that. I would have wanted that in the unit that I was in as well. But to use this as a tool of political correctness and to move away from this singular mission, because there's a lot of entities that have multiple missions. The military's only got one, right? It's that when the Secretary of State fails, right? When the Secretary of State is unable to use diplomacy to get the means that America is prepared to do, the world needs to know that we have a strong and powerful military willing to go break things and kill people, right? It's just, this is why we pay them. This is what we do. If we start to turn away from that mission and trade it into just another laboratory of political correctness, we will diminish our capacity to do the things that our republic needs our military to do.
I got one question for you, sir.
Yes, sir. This is that. Last question.
This last question, real quick. I think the greatest deficit in America today is leadership. So everybody talks about fiscal irresponsibility, things of that nature. Lincoln once said, if all the armies of the world got together, they'll never drink from the Mississippi. The enemy will come from within.
Yep.
I got a problem, and I think a lot of people here do, We got a lot of guys with soft hands, soft shoes, okay? They're up in DC, let's just be honest with you. I was in the Marine for 27 years, my great-great-grandfather fought a little round town. My grandfather fought in Battle of Una, 42 months in the Pacific. I would love to have you ask them, and how do you and Mr. Whitaker, the only guys I've ever seen, speak truth to power? My question is to both of you two, where is the courage of these men and women that a lot of people speak fondly of, our senators, our congress? How do you hold them accountable? Because at the end of the day, when you watch the life of young men's eyes, the light go out of their eyes, you got to face their parents as a Marine infantry officer, okay? I want to know that their sacrifice was worthy of our effort today.
So it's a great question to end with. Maybe the central question. Maybe the central question of our time in that sense. I'll speak for myself. I don't want to comment on others. I'll speak for myself. I feel that every day. I felt it every day when I was a businessman, that I owed my people, my team that I was trying to build, the absolute God's honest truth as best I knew, and I was willing to work harder than they were, to your point, right? Soft hands, no good. I was, at one point, I could assemble and disassemble an M242 machine gun just as good as any soldier in my tank platoon. It matters. These leaders matter. When I watch political leaders and they whine about things that people say about them. I get it. It's not fun when you come home and your wife says, "Did you see what they said today?" I get it. But that pales. That absolutely pales in comparison. We would always remind my wife is just lovely. My wife would remind us there's a lot of young people in really tough places today, and the fact that there's a piece of ink on a piece of paper that said something about you is immaterial. Let's go keep fighting. And in the end, what it requires, and this comes from those of you in the room this morning, this requires a boldness and a fearlessness. And I think the last 4 years we had that. I think the last 4 years we had a boldness that was willing to fly on a plane and go across the world and look a leader in the face and say, "Not happening." Or, "Here's how I can help make that happen for you. Here's the way we're going to work together." But to do so in a way that was in the finest tradition of America. I ran the State Department, right? Very different from my time in the United States military, right? What I tried to tell these folks, we were diplomats. Our mission set was to save soldiers from ever having to be engaged anywhere in the world. But I reminded them every day that you had a duty to not go in and soft pedal America. Not to get in the room and go, "Yeah, you're right, we're great." It's not that we think we're perfect. It's not, I get that. Make mistakes, I've made two. Just an hour I've been with you this morning. But never forget who we are and why we are, and to boldly proclaim it. And if we do that, if we elect leaders that do that, and we don't let people off just because they're from our party, we stand a far better chance of doing what it is that you all got out of bed on a Friday morning to come here and talk about. Thank you, sir. God bless you. Thank you for your service. Let me finish. You can see the list of challenges that we have in front of us. When my first trip, I got off the plane in North Korea. There was a general sitting to my left, standing to my left. His name was Kim Young-chol. He became my counterpart in the negotiations. He's a nasty man. He was in his 70s, a 4-star retired general. He had blood on his hands. Bad guy. We knew that's who I would encounter. He was standing there. I came down off the plane. The translator, I reached out and shook his hand, and the translator said, "Mr. Chol says that we've been eating grass for 50 years and we can eat grass for another 50 years. There was a message there. I said, "Nice to meet you." I'm from Kansas, right? His point was that they're tough. I'm very confident that we are tougher. I'm very confident that we are more bold. I am very confident that the Lord is watching over this nation. And that in the end, our faith and the good works that come behind it will lead America to continue to be the greatest nation. And that Kim Young-chol will be wrong. And then America will be the country that comes out in a way that delivers good outcomes for our people and for people all across the world. And it'll be because of all the good work that we all do. Thank you for joining me this morning. It was a joy.